The gallery was quiet, too quiet for a night meant to celebrate legacy. Emily Rosewell stood alone beneath the amber light of the Rosewell Heritage Museum, her heels echoing softly against marble floors. Tonight was supposed to be about the past, the curated kind, the one framed and dusted and made to shine. She adjusted the collar of her blazer, eyes fixed on the final piece being lifted into place. A towering portrait in a gold frame. Liam, her son, captured at 12, sunlight in his curls, innocence still cradled in his eyes. As the installers stepped back to admire their work, Harris Chambers entered with his mop bucket in tow, same as he had for 20 quiet years. He nodded politely, prepared to clean and disappear unnoticed, until his gaze met the portrait. The cloth slipped from his gloved hand. His breath caught. A sound escaped his throat, part gasp, part prayer. Emily turned, startled by the silence stretching too long. Harris. He didn't answer. He stepped closer to the portrait, each footfall unsteady. His eyes shimmered with something ancient, recognition wrapped in sorrow. "Ma'am," he whispered, voice cracking. "I know this child." Emily's brow furrowed. "That's Liam," she said gently. "My son." Harris shook his head, slowly at first, then with rising conviction. "No, ma'am. His name is Noah. He grew up in my orphanage." The room contracted. Emily blinked, as if the walls were closing in around her. Her heart thudded with a rhythm she hadn't felt since the day she first brought Liam home. "He was—" Harris paused, eyes never leaving the boy's face. "He was like a son to me. And one day, he just disappeared." Emily swallowed hard. She wanted to speak, to dismiss it, but the portrait between them now pulsed with a presence she could no longer name. What had once symbolized joy and belonging now hung like a question she wasn't ready to ask. She looked at Harris again, his trembling frame, the tears tracing lines down his weathered face. "Are you sure?" "I'd stake my soul on it," he said. "Noah was his name, and if that's him, then someone has been hiding the truth for a very long time." Emily's breath hitched, because deep down, beneath the love, beneath the years, she'd always known there was a missing piece. And now it had found her. Before the story unfolds, make sure you like, share, subscribe, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. You don't want to miss what happens next. Now let's dive into the story. Emily closed her office door softly behind them. The ticking of the old museum clock echoed like a heartbeat. Harris sat stiffly across from her, hands folded, hat in his lap. For a long moment, neither spoke. Emily finally broke the silence. "Tell me everything you remember." Harris's eyes searched the floor, as if memory were buried in the wood grain. "His name was Noah," he said softly. "Came to St. Bartholomew's when he was maybe 5. No one knew where he came from. No birth certificate. No history. The paperwork we got looked off. Forged almost. But nobody asked too many questions back then." Emily leaned forward, her heart pounding. "He was a quiet boy," Harris continued. "Gentle, polite, but smart, brilliant really. Used to draw buildings with detail I'd never seen. Cathedrals, temples, cities. Said they came to him in dreams." Emily's fingers curled tightly around her pen. Harris smiled faintly, eyes distant. He had this peace about him, like he knew something the rest of us didn't. Sometimes he'd whisper about a woman with golden hair. Emily froze. He said she was his mother. Said she was looking for him, that she'd find him one day. Harris paused. He said she was light, that she prayed over him even when he couldn't hear it. Emily's throat tightened. "Liam said the same thing," she whispered. "When I first brought him home, he told me his mother had golden hair, that she sang to him in dreams." They sat in silence as the truth crept in like a rising tide. Then one night, Harris said, voice trembling, a storm rolled in. Thunder shook the roof. I went to check on the kids, and Noah wasn't in his bed. Emily's breath caught. I found him at the front gate, barefoot in the rain, just sitting there, staring out into the dark. His voice lowered. He looked at me and said, "She's coming for me." I thought maybe he meant a real mother, someone finally coming to adopt him, but when I came back with a coat, he was gone. Emily stared at her hands. They were trembling. She thought of the day Liam had arrived, quiet, drenched from the rain, hand in the grip of an agency worker whose name she'd never been able to trace. She called, written, searched. Nothing. He vanished, and then days later, Liam appeared in my life, she said, mostly to herself. Harris looked at her, face pale. "It can't be coincidence, ma'am." "No," she whispered. "It's not." She stood abruptly and crossed the room to her filing cabinet, heart racing. She pulled out the thick manila envelope that held Liam's adoption records, papers she hadn't touched in years. With shaking hands, she opened it. Her eyes scanned the first few pages. Then she froze. Half of this is missing. Emily sat in the dim light of her office, the envelope still unopened in her hands. Outside the museum walls, the world carried on, but inside her chest, time had fractured. She hadn't thought about that day in years. Not really. Not with clear eyes. She closed her eyes, and memory swept in like a tide. It had been raining then, too. Kind of slow, steady rain that felt like mercy. She had been 42 alone, and carrying the hollow ache of 1,000 prayers unanswered. "God," she had whispered one night, kneeling by her bed, "I don't need perfect. I just need someone to love." The next week, a friend at church had handed her a number scribbled on a napkin. "Private facilitator," she'd said. "Quick placements. No waiting lists." Emily had called without hesitation. She remembered the woman who showed up, polished, smiling, and distant. Her name was Ms. Devon. No first name, no agency paperwork, just a contract, a signature, and a baby boy asleep in the back seat of a black car. He was abandoned, the woman said, too casually. No family, no history. He's yours if you want him, but we need to move fast. Emily remembered the sudden ache in her arms. The moment she looked into that boy's eyes filled with more silence than fear, and felt something crack open inside her. She signed the papers. She didn't ask about the missing medical history. She didn't ask about the falsified contact number. She didn't ask why it all felt too easy. She just took him home. "Lord, please let this be right," she had whispered as she buckled him into the back seat. "Let this be your gift." Now, in the stillness of the present, her hands shook. How had she never questioned any of it? Across the desk, Harris pulled something from his worn leather wallet, a folded, faded piece of paper. "Noah drew this the week before he disappeared," he said, smoothing it out. Emily leaned in and felt the blood drain from her face. It was a sketch, intricate, delicate, impossible. It was the museum, from an angle no child should have known. The columns, the arching skylight, even the sculpture of the lion's head above the west wing entrance, perfectly placed. "How could he have drawn this?" she whispered. Harris's voice was low. "He said he'd been here before." Emily looked up, heart pounding. "But that's not possible. This building, he would have been a child. He never came here." But even as the words left her lips, they rang hollow, because somewhere deep inside her, past logic, past fear, she knew. This boy, Noah Liam, was carrying memories that defied explanation, perhaps even time. Her eyes drifted to the unopened envelope, still sealed, still waiting. Emily stared at the museum security monitor long after Harris had left. The child's voice still echoed in her ears, so soft, so impossible. "Mama." By the time she arrived home, Liam was already asleep. His bedroom door creaked softly as she stepped inside. The room was still. Nightlight humming in the corner. Lego bricks scattered like forgotten memories. She sat beside him on the bed, watching the soft rise and fall of his chest. So peaceful, so unaware. Her hand trembled as she brushed aside the curls at the nape of his neck. And there it was, the birthmark, just behind his right ear. A faded crescent shape, like a thumbprint. She had noticed it once, years ago. Thought nothing of it. But Harris's voice came rushing back. A tiny mark behind his ear. Looked like the moon. Emily's stomach twisted. She closed her eyes, whispering, "Lord, what am I supposed to do with this?" There was no answer. Only silence. Holy. Heavy. She kissed Liam's forehead and slipped out of the room, heart pounding like a drum against her ribs. Downstairs, the envelope Harris had given her sat unopened on the kitchen table. With trembling hands, she peeled it open. Inside was Noah's orphanage file, worn, faded, water-stained with time. A few pages, a note from a nurse, and drawings. One was a stick-figure woman with long yellow hair, arms stretched wide. At the bottom, "She sings when I cry." Another was a small photograph of a stuffed lion, dirty, loved, missing one eye. Emily gasped. That same toy sat on Liam's bookshelf. He'd never let her throw it away. Her hand shook now. The nurse's note described a boy who spoke rarely, but always asked about the woman in the sky. And beneath it all, the sealed report. No official birth record, intake date smudged, no biological family listed. She sat back, hands covering her mouth. Dear God, after all these years, what had she really taken home? Driven by a sudden need to see the truth, she pulled Liam's adoption file from the drawer she never opened. She laid the papers out on the table. And this time, she really looked. 2 dates on the intake forms didn't match. One said January 14th, another February 9th. The seal from the agency was off-center, crooked, no state signature, no notary, no witness line. It was like someone had copied real paperwork, but left out the soul. Emily pressed her hands to her chest. She had prayed for a child, begged, pleaded, and she believed God answered her. But what if that answer had come through the hands of someone who stole? Her eyes filled with tears. Not just grief, but guilt. She hadn't adopted Liam. She had unknowingly received him. He was taken, and now someone wanted him back. The photo sat in the center of Emily's desk, grainy and creased from years, in a file no one was supposed to read. A woman in a charcoal blazer stared back, shoulder-length hair, sunglasses, expression unreadable. Emily had seen her once. Briefly. She called herself Miss Devon. Now, under the photo, was a real name, Clarissa Ward. Harris leaned over the image, his brow furrowing. Her, he whispered. That's her. Emily looked up, voice tight. You've seen her. He nodded slowly. She came to St. Bartholomew's. Said she was a state social worker doing a wellness inspection. But there was something off about her. She never gave a business card. Just flashed a badge real quick and asked to see the quiet kids. Emily's mouth went dry. The quiet kids. The ones less likely to talk. Harris said grimly. Noah was on that list. Emily's stomach flipped. Did you report it? I tried, Harris said. 3 weeks later, I got a call from a private investigator working with a child welfare watchdog. Said the woman had popped up in 3 states. Different names. Always around kids who ended up missing. He slid a folder toward her. The contents were sparse, just a few photocopied reports. Allegations, closed investigations, and a single devastating phrase: suspected involvement in child trafficking and identity forgery. Emily's hands began to tremble. My God, was I used to launder a stolen child? Tears stung her eyes as she leaned against the edge of the desk. Her heartbeat was pounding in her ears, a sick rhythm of fear and guilt. "Emily," Harris said gently, stepping closer, "you didn't steal him. That woman did. You loved him. You raised him. And Noah adored you from the moment you held him. You're his mother." She covered her face with her hands. "I asked God for a child," she whispered. "But what if I accepted a miracle that wasn't mine to take?" Harris knelt beside her, voice firm. "Miracles don't come from darkness, but sometimes they survive it. That boy is yours, but we must find the truth. For him, and for you." Emily nodded slowly, wiping her tears. "Where do we even start?" Harris handed her another sheet, one he'd found folded in the back of Noah's old file. A scanned emergency room record. Emily skimmed it, then stopped cold. Patient name: unknown minor. Date of service: April 3rd. Diagnosis: bruised ribs, dehydration. Hospital: Brookridge Community Medical Center. Location: 14 miles north of the Roswell Museum. 2 days after Noah vanished from the orphanage. Emily's breath caught. "He was there," she whispered. "So close. Just miles away." "Maybe he tried to escape," Harris murmured. "Maybe someone found him. Or maybe he didn't finish." Emily stood, the hospital name burning into her mind. She didn't know what they'd find there, but for the first time, she wasn't afraid to ask. The road to Brookridge was lined with amber trees and restless silence. Emily hadn't said much since they left the museum. Harris could feel her tension, the way her knuckles whitened on the steering wheel, her jaw set tight like a door bolted shut. When they pulled into the hospital lot, modest, aging, tucked behind a grove of oaks, it felt like driving into a memory. Inside, the receptionist led them to the archives wing, now mostly retired offices and half-empty filing cabinets. They were greeted by a woman in her 70s, hair pinned in a neat bun, her smile kind but cautious. "I was the overnight nurse back in '08, she said after Harris showed the ER record. "I remember that boy. Hard to forget." Emily leaned in. "Can you tell us anything?" The nurse sat slowly, hands folded. He didn't speak for hours. Sat in the corner, soaked to the bone. Just stared at the window like he expected someone to find him. All he had was a little wooden lion. Wouldn't let it go. Emily's breath caught. Liam still kept that toy beside his bed. "I brought him water, wrapped him in a warm blanket." Finally, he whispered something. "What did he say?" Harris asked gently. The nurse looked between them. "I know this place," she recalled. "I've been here before." Emily's throat tightened. Her mind flashed with images, Liam's early drawings. Hospital beds, hallways, a lion in the corner of every page. They weren't fantasies. They were memories. "I thought he was confused," the nurse continued. "No ID, no adult with him. But by morning, someone came." Emily stiffened. "Who?" "A woman. Polished, all business. Had paperwork with the Roswell name. Said the boy was a family ward. Took him before the morning shift changed. Honestly, I was relieved. I thought he was going home." Emily stood, her face pale. "Someone in my family signed those papers?" Harris placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "We'll find out who." They retrieved the logbooks. The visitor's name was scribbled in neat cursive: Marion Roswell. Emily staggered back like she'd been struck. "My aunt," she whispered. "She was the museum director before me." "She ever mentioned knowing that boy?" Harris asked. "Never. She died 6 years ago. Took care of the museum like it was her child. Emily pressed a hand to her chest, nausea curling through her stomach. She must have been involved. The adoption. The lies. She's not the only one, Harris said quietly. He pulled a folded newspaper, clipping from his coat. I found this in the archives this morning. He handed it to Emily. It was an article from 2007. Roswell Museum director honored for private contributions to International Children's Relief Network. Beneath the headline, a photo of Marion Roswell shaking hands with a woman in a charcoal blazer. Emily's knees buckled. Clarissa Ward. Back at the museum, the portrait loomed like a ghost. Liam's face frozen in oil and light. Forever 12, forever watching. Emily had walked past it for years without seeing anything but her son. But now, every brushstroke whispered of secrets. Harris stood on a step stool, his gloved fingers tracing the edge of the gilded frame. It's subtle, he murmured, but it's there. Emily moved closer. At the bottom corner, buried in the ornate scrollwork, nearly swallowed by gold leaf, was a mark. Faint, intentional. A small triangle inside a circle, barely visible. But once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. Harris stepped down, voice low. This symbol's shown up in 3 different investigations tied to Clarissa Ward's network, usually hidden on documents or stitched into clothing. It marks the children who've been placed. Emily stared at it, her heart pounding. Placed, she repeated. Like inventory. She turned away, fighting a wave of nausea. So this wasn't chance, she said softly. Liam didn't just come to me. He was delivered. But why you? Harris asked, echoing the question forming like a storm in her mind. Emily sank into a nearby bench, staring at her hands. Because I had money, a name, influence, and no husband. Harris added gently. No one asked too many questions. The truth settled over them like dust. Liam had been sent to her, not as a gift, but as a transaction. But for what? She asked, voice trembling. Why would someone target me? Harris opened a worn notebook and flipped to a scribbled note. After Marion's name showed up on those hospital logs, I started digging into the museum's finances. Turns out 10 years ago, a large anonymous donation came through, nearly $500,000. Emily's eyes narrowed. I never saw that. It was funneled through an overseas charity. Traced it back to an organization flagged for laundering funds tied to black market adoptions. Her mouth went dry. So this was a deal. A debt, Harris said. A bribe. Or maybe a punishment. Marion may have owed someone. Emily's stomach churned. Her aunt had always been secretive, meticulous. Now she wondered what darkness Marion had shielded in the name of legacy. And Liam, her sweet, brilliant, gentle Liam, had been caught in the middle. A bargaining chip, she whispered. They used my son as a bargaining chip. She stood slowly, her voice suddenly firm. No more running. No more pretending this didn't happen. If they chose me because of my name, then I'll use that name to burn down whatever's left of this lie. Harris nodded, but his eyes were heavy. Are you sure? Once you pull this thread. I don't care, she said. I will protect my son, even if it means exposing every sin my family ever buried. She turned toward the hallway, but stopped when she saw the envelope sitting on her desk. Not the old one. A new one. Unmarked. Unopened. She hadn't put it there. The key Emily found in Marion's desk had no label, but somehow she knew where it belonged. She and Harris moved through the museum's back corridors, past staff-only doors and forgotten stairwells, until they reached the private archives, a part of the building that hadn't been touched in years. The key turned with a soft click. The door creaked open. Dust floated in slants of afternoon light, thick as secrets. Rows of filing cabinets lined the walls, old leather-bound ledgers, stacked like tombstones. But what stopped Emily cold was the locked cabinet in the corner. She pulled open the drawer. What spilled out was not history. It was horror. Adoption files, dozens of them. Some thin, some thick. All stamped with Rosewell letterhead and sealed with private fund transfers. Emily's hands moved numbly, flipping through documents. Children's names, ages, medical records. One file opened to a grainy photo of a boy standing beside a church, eyes too old for his face. Noah, Liam. Her hands trembled. He was never lost. He was taken. Harris's voice was a whisper. These aren't just adoptions. These are transactions. One envelope contained a note, handwritten, shaky, and signed by Marion Rosewell. The debts are too deep. The family must survive. One child, to preserve the legacy. May God forgive me. Emily's breath hitched. Another paper fluttered to the floor. Harris picked it up. It was a contract, signed by Clarissa Ward, authorized by Marion, listing Liam's delivery date. Here, Harris said softly, pointing to the payment line. This isn't a donation. It's a payoff. Emily's legs buckled. She sank to the floor, gripping the edge of the drawer. It was real, she whispered. Everything we feared. He was sold to cover up my family's sins. Tears slipped down her cheeks, slow, silent. I wanted to believe he came to me because God heard my cry. But it wasn't heaven that sent him. It was a lie. Harris knelt beside her, his hand firm on her shoulder. Emily, he said gently, Liam didn't choose how he got here. But you chose him. You gave him a life, a home, love. That wasn't part of their plan. That was you. She wiped her face, heart pounding. We give him the truth, Harris said, no matter how dark it is. Emily nodded, but then a sound, soft, deliberate, outside the door. Harris stood quickly. Shadows shifted across the frosted glass. They weren't alone. Emily held her breath. A whisper of movement, then footsteps, retreating. She crossed the room and pulled the door open, but the hallway was empty, except for one thing, a small folded note on the floor. She picked it up, her hands trembling, for words scrawled in hurried ink. He remembers more now. The file box felt heavier than its size as Emily placed it on the detective's desk. Inside, decades of hidden shame, signed contracts, falsified papers, and photographs no child should ever have had to pose for. I want every child found, she said, her voice steady. Every name followed, every person involved brought into the light. The officer nodded, grim and focused. With what you've given us, this whole thing's going to crack open. It did. Within days, Clarissa Ward was taken into custody. Several of her aliases matched sealed international warrants. Others, facilitators, donors, handlers, fell like dominoes. But the house of Rosewell did not fall. It changed. Emily waited until the noise quieted in her soul before telling Liam the truth. They sat on the back porch, sunlight pooling around them. The wind moved slowly through the trees, like God himself was listening. I want to tell you something hard, Emily said, brushing his hair gently behind his ear. Liam turned to her, his small hand wrapped around hers. She spoke carefully, truthfully, gently. When she finished, Liam sat quiet for a long while, eyes studying the lion toy in his lap. Then he looked up. But you still wanted me. Tears blurred her vision. More than anything in this world. I didn't know how you came to me, but I chose to love you. Every single day. He climbed into her lap and buried his face in her chest. I choose you too, he whispered. Harris came by the house often after that. At first, just to check in. Then to stay for dinner. Then for birthdays and school plays. Liam clung to him the first night. He called Harris Papa. Neither of them spoke, but both cried. Some wounds, it turns out, remember warmth more than pain. A year later, the Rosewell Foundation opened its doors in a newly restored wing of the museum. Its mission: to fight child trafficking, support recovered victims, and fund investigations the world had forgotten. It bore Liam's name, not for what had been stolen from him, but for what had been given back. That fall, a new portrait was commissioned. This time, Liam sat in the center. On one side, Emily, strong, soft-eyed, her hand resting on his shoulder. On the other, Harris, steady, safe, smiling like a man who had finally come home. In Liam's lap sat the old wooden lion, still missing one eye. The artist asked him to smile, and he did. Not the quiet, cautious smile of a boy with too many questions, but the full-hearted grin of a child who finally knew. He was loved. Sometimes the truth breaks a family, but sometimes it sets the pieces in place to build a new one, stronger, braver, and finally whole.
If this story touched you even a little, tell me in the comments which moment hit you the hardest. Share this with someone who needs hope today. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next story might be the one that heals something in you.